Chris Folgers. August 9th, 2023. Share. The Folgers Theory. Final version. Abstract. This is an introduction to the author's, Folgers Theory, which aims to explain the nature and origin of our spacetime. The theory is based on the idea that dimensions are fractally stacked on top of each other and arise from a lower dimension by a collision between two magnetic monopoles in a higher dimension. The theory explains how the multidimensional magnetic field and magnetic monopoles determine the behavior and properties of our spacetime. The theory states that we are part of a network of neurons within the brain of a multidimensional entity manifested as the stars in our universe. The theory proposes that we live in a ring of magnetic flux located on the horizon of a magnetically charged black hole enveloping our universe. The author uses mathematical, physical, and philosophical methods to develop and support the theory, and refers to relevant literature. The main findings are: dimensions are stacked fractally, a collision between magnetic monopoles created our spacetime, the magnetic field and monopoles determine spacetime properties, we are part of a network of neurons in a brain with more dimensions, and we live in a ring of magnetic flux on a black hole horizon. The theory is original and relevant because it offers a new perspective on the nature and origin of our spacetime and is related to other physical phenomena. The theory could explain or generate phenomena such as an inexhaustible magnetic drive, a magnetic levitation system, magnetic teleportation, magnetic communication, and a magnetic computer. Forward. We are going to tell the ultimate creation story according to the Folgers theory. From start to finish and completely complete. Because the theory has finally taken its final form. What began months ago as proving the flat Earth has eventually become a theory of everything that can explain absolutely anything, including the flat Earth. But I have also discovered something much bigger, which is really the explanation for the flat Earth. Why do we experience that flat non-rotating Earth? And besides, if I always claim that there is only one pole, why do we measure a so-called dipole everywhere? Not only do I have an answer to this, but it also shows that we as humanity are indeed collectively simply being deceived by the elite. It really is, and I can prove it. Just as I can prove the existence of God, and that is very special. Never before has there been a theory that could plausibly explain in a physical way that God exists. In this statement you will hear why this is really the case. We live on a very special creation. Our consciousness experiences a very wonderful world. And both our world and our consciousness is something that we are not very aware of. I.e., you and I are first of all something very different from what we think we are. Our world is something very different from what we think it is. From an early age, of course, we are thrown to death and indoctrinated to death with the sphere idea. The spinning balls universe of science. From an early age we are also instructed that the flat Earth is the greatest nonsense that has ever been spouted. That's really been there from an early age, very well rammed in. To the point of morbidity, we can actually ascertain. Because I can have any discussion with anyone, except that the Earth would be flat, then everyone is suddenly a learned physicist and better to tell me exactly why the Earth would not rotate. Why the Earth is certainly not flat. In the years of discussions about the flat Earth, in which I myself must indeed come from good houses in the field of physics. In order to explain all this, and especially to be able to refute all the arguments against, I had noticed one thing, is that virtually most people have not eaten cheese from the science of this spinning sphere of Earth. And that is only logical, because after kindergarten we never learn anything about our planet again. It is held as a truth forever. And that's not a big deal in that sense, because it's really true that we're spinning things around in a universe. The fact that this is really the case and has been proven and invented by scientists 120 years ago, and on which the future and progression of humanity is based, we cannot simply dismiss that. Tesla tried to do that at the time by ignoring Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity. And the flat Earth community in a way is also trying to present their theories and so-called proofs. Two theories that are diametrically opposed and seem incompatible. So what is the truth and what is it really about? We mainly measure a flat, non-rotating Earth and can measure nothing but something like that. A strong argument for the flat Earth community. However, data from radio telescopes and the like suggest and tell us that as a system we simply run in a larger network. A strong argument for the theories of relativity. Both of these things are true, so how the hell can we unify this? So how can we unite this? An indication of this is the fact that what we can personally control ourselves would be the most common truth for us. In that case, we would have to assume a measurable, non-rotating flat Earth. That seems to be true, because a very strong indication that we should is this. We can talk about scientific theories or physical theories, but that is different from physical laws. The laws of nature are something that cannot be ignored and cannot be changed. The fundamental laws of nature. Aerodynamics, thermodynamics, hydrodynamics, and so on. In order to accurately calculate these laws of physics, we must always assume a stationary, non-rotating flat Earth. Earth's magnetic field may have a spherical shape, but for our perception it runs in a line from north to south. In other words, we as observers have a somewhat distorted view of reality. And that is caused by, among other things, the position and capacity in which we find ourselves. Something we have never quite understood until now. And I think I'm going to clarify that quite a bit today. And I'll suggest a few fascinating things. Welcome to the Folgers Theory. The great deception, of course, starts with science that does realize that we are running in a 4D spacetime, and that they have chosen to present this model to us, as if we live on the outer edge of this ball, and that we have an open connection with the universe, which is a vacuum, and that we can also fly and stay there with a spaceship. And those are all things that have been hopelessly debunked and simply not true. Except that there is indeed one 4D spacetime in which we move as a system. So I don't know what the reason is that they've been deceiving us for 100 years, probably to keep us inspired about the wonderful universe we're part of. However, I don't think it's such a noble-minded. It is mainly to express our spirit and to keep our consciousness unconscious of the real state of our world. The world is flat. And that's the most censored topic on the internet, which is also particularly telling. And what is even more telling is the hatred and struggle against people who sell the flat earth truth as credible. Those people need to be completely dealt with and censored and show banned. The flat earth belief is actually dangerous. For a society is set. It would be a danger to democracy or the social hierarchy. That's because it does indeed tell of this incredible deception that is being taught to us by science. It also embodies the fact that we cannot argue with this science as the normal citizen or whatever. Because one is not open to one's truths, even if they are still so true, because one simply maintains a narrative for the collective. A misleading narrative that keeps us spiritually and physically stupid and locks us on our continent. The world is a very different place from what we think it is, and we are in a system of slavery and oppression. An economic system that fully exploits us and benefits this elite. That is the real status in our world, and this has been going on for 100 years. Yet one seems sincerely to have stood still for 100 years in the most fundamental physics and the discoveries that follow. At the beginning of 1900, the biggest fundamental issues were laid down for science, and not much has happened since then because people get stuck in unifying the models. The models individually we all accurately describe their domain, but these domains cannot be connected to each other. That's because the scientists in every domain are naturally so indoctrinated and highly educated in their field, no longer have the capabilities or the creativity to be able to think outside of these parameters. They have completely compartmentalized themselves. They are so specialized that they have actually completely isolated themselves and are no longer really accessible by science in general. But, therefore, as the ultimate authority are seen in their own domain, which thus yields a collection of domain sciences. Being incredibly specialized, but completely incompatible. And so there are a number of insurmountable problems. A number of paradoxes have arisen, and so there are many phenomena that have no explanation at all or can be explained by science. An important element in the fact that one cannot describe or answer this is the fact that one does not take consciousness seriously. Of course, That's part of the indoctrination we all get on our world, isn't it? Consciousness is a personal thing. Something meaningless and above all a function and a product of the brain. In other words, consciousness has no influence on our seemingly objective fixed reality. People are so fixated on the fact that consciousness must be a function of the brain that they simply ignore important results from research. The most telling thing is what I always mentioned at the time, the so-called collapse of wave function. Which means that the physical reality that we experience around us as the tangible world only takes shape when it focuses our consciousness on it. That's the interpretation you should have of the result of the so-called double-slit experiment. It shows that a particle, an elementary particle, behaves differently when there is someone paying attention to it. If there is no one paying attention, this is a great mystery to science, because they cannot recognize that consciousness has an influence on the result. And even though there are scientists who have suggested this, they immediately face enormous opposition, and this has never been recognized or taken seriously at all. Consciousness does not create the world according to science, and has nothing to do with objective reality. And that's right, because there is no such thing as an objective reality. But that's so anti-scientific to say. Because we can all objectively measure and know things. So what's going on here? And I'm going to explain that to you in a genius way. So I tell you that consciousness and its foundation is responsible for everything. So everything is then a subjective experience of someone. But since we all seem to be stuck in the same subjective experience of the collective, we are simply going to state that we all have a subjective experience of a collective objective reality. And how am I supposed to explain that, you'll think? Welcome to the Folgers Theory. A theory that will give you a radically different picture about the real world we live on, what we are, what we do here, and how this will end. We live on a planet. On a plane. A plane. We live on a flat world that is electromagnetically shielded from its surroundings. There is, say, a kind of dome over us. This dome protects us from our hostile environment, but it is also really not permeable to us as the entities that inhabit this structure. Something like space travel or satellites and the like is impossible. In those 50s we even tried to detonate atomic bombs at high altitudes, which resulted in a kind of watery ripple in the firmament above us. The electromagnetic boundary that closes our world from its environment. But what is our world and what is that hostile environment? What are the phenomena we see in the sky as the stars and the like? And I really have a very wonderful new explanation for that you have never heard before, but which is an explanation for all the phenomena that we observe. We live on the horizon of a magnetically charged black hole. That is the so-called field line of a monopole. And how exactly that came about, I'm going to tell you. In a way that we can all understand that, too. Each dimension is made up of matter and energy. It starts with subatomic particles that eventually form all the structures around us. This is how our planet, but also our body and our entire visible universe is seemingly constructed. It also embodies a number of dimension jumps in itself. If we look at the subatomic particles that we then consist of, that is a completely different representation of the world, as we experience a natural in our capacity. Yet this is an essential part of our own body, but is a completely different dimension than what we can perceive or what we are aware of. We are made up of those subatomic particles. Just as we are not aware of what we are essentially made of, we are also not aware of what we are essentially part of as a collective. Our entire globe, however you have it in your head, is as a whole a subatomic elementary particle in the dimension above us. And so our dimensions, say stacked on top of each other, as a fractal repetition of the same thing every time, and only in a higher order of organization and self-awareness. For the ultimate driver and carrier of this whole perceptual whole is consciousness. Creation and consciousness are inextricably linked. It may be a subjective experience, but for us as subjective observers we experience the world as real and therefore objective. Yet in essence we do not know what we are, what our world is, and especially what we do here. What is the purpose of life? How exactly did we end up here, and how can we learn more about our status and environment? How do we find out if there is more than just life on Earth? Why have we never had contact with extraterrestrial life? Despite that seemingly vast universe? Because we live on a totally different planet, if we think a planet is at all. Once again, we live on the field line or on the horizon of a magnetically charged black hole. The story begins in a higher dimension that we cannot imagine and perceive. This is in the real universe in which there are monopoles who are both self-aware and able to move freely. Consciousness is a monopole. We are a monopole in a higher dimension. A monopole is a subatomic particle. In a higher dimension, this monopole has collided with another monopole. As a result, these monopoles ended up in a kind of vortex. And in this way they have become entangled in the manufacture of reality in a higher dimension. That's called a topological soliton. It creates a huge explosion, a Big Bang. It is the birth of our universe, our dimension, but it is above all your birth on Earth, in which you are self-aware and now suddenly you are on a planet that you cannot get rid of and where you do not know where you come from, what you are and what you do here. You are only aware of billions of people around you in a vast and wondrous universe. As I stated earlier, we are trapped in our bodies in a world full of duality. An internal conflict between good and evil, which also translates into the world around us. This is a result of our status in the dimension above, in which we used to be a freely movable conscious element, and are now trapped in a certain construction. Something that limits us enormously and that we do not seem to get out of, with which we clearly do not agree. So what exactly is going on here? You can call it a spiritual school, and it is indeed a development of our consciousness, also clearly a somewhat diabolical or evil element that we cannot ignore. I have experienced this myself personally in my rise on the internet. Because then I became aware that the media, the internet, or everyone who is known is a controlled male or female. In other words, that means that people around me who have online programs are being extorted by the government. No one is known without being controlled or controlled in a very nasty way. It's always from a blackmailable position. That's just the crazy way our crazy world works. Another thing we can't ignore is that it's obviously a Satanism in our world and all that symbolism that goes with it. It's just a very dark club. People who seem to be pulling the strings here. No one gets rich and influential without not having already been gotten into trouble in an incredibly nasty way. In itself, and trouble has helped. And again, they've tried to do this to me countless times as well. And of course, that's why I'm not allowed to have a large reach, but can have a large range. So if I sell the talk that benefits the elite, for example, if I go into it or go along with it in the narrative against politics or something like that. Because of course our entire society is based on the fact that we pay attention to the dick story that is being told to us. So if I move along with that image or create content, I can get a large reach. The best example is of the war in Russia and my Putin video, which went viral worldwide with millions and views. It shows that we as humanity naturally disagree with that so-called war, but the context of the video. Also, it wasn't credible. In any case, it creates division among the people, so it may go viral. It creates attention on the created fake situation, so it may go viral. The war in Ukraine, for example, is simply a media campaign. It may be really going on here and there. It is also really a scam in its foundation. Because that so-called elite is not in conflict with each other at all. They have a collective enemy, and that is the people. We are a herd of people who are kept in a people reserve, who are lulled to sleep with a false worldview. Another great example of a subject that also gets a lot of attention in the media and which is also definitely a scam is extraterrestrial life and contact with extraterrestrial life, which is now seemingly taking place worldwide in a global hype of UFOs and aliens. And also, that's all 100% deception, I can tell you, but they also told yourself that in the 60s or 50s. The father of the rocket program, Werner von Braun, told you. First we get the Russians, then we get asteroids, and then we get the aliens, and it's all fake. And if you delve into that a bit more, you will also find out that everything is indeed fake and everything is a kind of mind control campaign. It is to keep you mostly stupid, ignorant, and focused on something else, if the real truth. And as soon as you know the real truth and start speaking it, you find out what a crazy world we live in. So clearly a somewhat evil element in our story. That may be the case, and they will try to keep as much knowledge away from us as possible, because of the arrival of artificial intelligence that is different now. And they have already limited the chatbots quite a bit, but fortunately I have had enough time to put together my theory in a decent way, so that I can now also continue to work in the limited version. They can't stop it now. I turned spiritual life into spiritual science. And this is that science. Chris Folgers. Introduction.